I've been like freelancing for Waymaker for 2 years now, which is honestly crazy. Like I remember day one, um, I'd done it obviously in the past, but yeah, I've honestly seen my fair share of different styles of minutes.
I know. And I have been doing this for longer than I care to admit. I mean, even back to when I was an exec PA at Oxford University, that was before setting up Waymaker.
Mhm.
You do end up seeing it all, don't you? And I
Yeah.
think something that I wonder if you've experienced lots of is what I might call a hostile meeting. I don't know whether you've had anything like that or where there's kind of lots of tension in the room. It's not something I've come across lots, but is that something you've had in any of your meetings?
Yeah, no, it's so funny that you mentioned that because I really have. Mainly the in-person ones can, I think
Really?
because you're just physically in the room, you know,
Yeah, yeah,
you just feel like eyes and the tension and body language, but especially I do feel like sometimes when I've got regular minutes and I know the client well,
yeah,
it can be, even if it is like an online meeting, you feel, I don't know, I feel like if they're having an off day sometimes, like it's just like an
yeah.
energy, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's worth saying, isn't it, that there are definitely certain types of meeting where you might expect there to be high attention. So, for example, when we're doing HR meetings, so you know there's going to be more chance of there being like emotion in the room. Um, but even within that, of course, most of the time it's professional, but the subject matter can be quite tense. It can obviously be quite adversarial,
Mhm.
the that sense of it, employer versus employee, that kind of thing. And we're there in the middle as this independent minute taker trying to be neutral while quite tricky discussions are being had. Or another scenario I've had where it can be tense is where but where perhaps you're not expecting it to be tense is a classic board meeting, but they're having, the attendees are having quite a heated discussion because they've got really differing points of view, um, where you might expect it to remain professional, but very rarely it kind of it descends into it not being so professional. And for me, like you say, especially if you're in the room, but even on Zoom or Teams or Google Meets, when somebody makes that choice to be unprofessional when everyone else was being professional, it's really uncomfortable, isn't it?
Yeah, you feel like everyone's tension in the room. I mean, what I do to try and caveat that, Lydia, is, I mean, it depends on the client and what they want, but
Yeah,
naturally, when I'm coming on an online meeting, I'll greet for 10 minutes, it might be the introduction happens, all of your usual previous minutes and all of that. And then I sometimes, and I will tell them I'm going to go off camera now, because I think
yeah.
sometimes when I'm sat on the camera, it can obviously maybe, I don't know, it might feel awkward for the people in the room, like because I'm obviously not intentionally, but I'm obviously watching the meeting, um,
Yeah. Or
and
you're busy
visually.
typing and concentrating,
Yes,
so you've got a face that, isn't doesn't
it's
look
not
great.
very pretty.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think, it's important to say, isn't it? This is not something we come across all the time. Certainly
Yeah.
unprofessional behavior. I don't come across that often,
No.
but I have had it.
Mhm.
Um, and it does make me feel physically really uncomfortable. Anything that feels like conflict, especially when you're at work,
Yeah.
can just feel even more heightened. But even then, with the HR ones, I always have a kind of tense sort of knot in my stomach because I want to do a good job. I want to make sure I remain neutral and um, especially when I'm in the room. I had a client where I had to be physically in the room with my laptop because I type my minutes
Yeah,
directly into my minute taking document, and you want to be sort of removed enough if the table's big enough so that you're slightly away rather than in it. But certainly for me, the layout was literally employers one side of the table and employee, and they had a companion with them on the other side. So
yeah,
it's set up to be adversarial in that sense. And there's also that idea of
mm,
um, the employer has employed us.
yeah,
So you are there at the behest of one party and not the other, but you are still neutral in the sense that whatever was said in that room and in that meeting will be captured. So it
yeah,
is an accurate and fair record. I've got no bias to either party,
mm,
but it is still a potentially high tense situation.
yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, I know it's a given, but even just like arriving early, having that
Yeah,
conversation, like where am I sitting, and just kind of getting
yeah,
yourself comfortable, getting
yeah.
obviously all your prep up and all your notes, and I think that can help matters because I think sometimes obviously, you don't want to obviously arrive very promptly to the meeting and then, you know,
And be flustered.
yeah, absolutely. Like you almost literally want to become a part of the furniture. Like you've
Yeah,
literally just molded yourself in there and,
yeah.
like it's like you weren't there basically.
No, absolutely. You were telling me the other day you have a really good trick. When I think you were telling me there was a client recently where it was in the room, it was in person, and it was a residence meeting,
Mhm.
and so that that is also can get heated or a bit tense. But you told me this really cool trick, and I can't remember it to help you.
Yeah, like I mean it's nothing it's quite basic actually, but
Okay.
it's almost being like imagining yourself like an actor or an actress. And it's that creating that focal point if you can, wherever it is in the room. So if it's like a wall or a window, something that you might actually quite like. Oh, I like that colour of the window, or I mean it sounds like a bit batty, if I'm honest with you, Lydia.
So
Like
how
it
does that
sounds like
help
I've
then? How does
lost
staring at a window help you?
I've lost my mind here. But I think it's that thing of stage fright. And
Okay.
like have looking at that window or that wall creates the poker face. I mean, naturally, I think I
Oh,
have quite a generic-y poker face.
okay.
Like, so it does help in that kind of situation. But then when I'm kind of in the seat, I kind of time travel. And I'm like, okay, and because I'm now time travel, have you seen those films where it's kind of like, oh God, I don't know, like Harry Potter and they're the time traveling one and they're kind of like watching themselves.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. And also, is it also that sense of you've got no way to affect what you're watching. Like you really are just an observer. You can't the meeting in this instance will unfold however it unfolds. It's not your responsibility to, I don't know, calm people down or get people back on track or make sure they stick to the agenda or whatever it is. You are literally there to observe and don't get involved. Is it like that?
Absolutely. And it is difficult sometimes, I'm not going to
Yeah,
lie. Like,
yeah.
it might like veer off the agenda and, naturally because we are part of these meetings, we know how they run from start to finish. So when it does veer, it's like a little thing in your brain, like,
Yes.
oh, okay. But the
Which
poker
agenda
face,
item do you think you're on now? Yeah, yeah.
yeah, but the poker face remains. We're in that situation. And then, obviously we can come out of it. I think in that situation, there was like a technological issue
Oh, okay.
with some of the microphones, and everyone
Okay.
was like at the front, there was a bit of a gathering. Oh, I don't know how this works. And so I was like, I literally like almost kind of stepped out and I was like, okay, yeah, I can fix this. And like I became
Oh, okay.
this,
You're back in the room.
yeah, I'm back in the room now.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so yeah, I don't know if you've
yeah.
got any sort of weird kind of tips on how you.
Only that, a bit, touching on what you said earlier about, getting, especially if you're in person, but, again, even if you're online, just like joining the meeting early, getting there with that little bit of time to collect yourself and to not be flustered yourself, especially say like a HR one where it's going to be a tense and challenging meeting.
Yeah,
Um, and for me, then I do literally just tell myself, you are there to be neutral. This isn't your meeting. You're there, you have a job to do. You have a job to do, and that's why you've been requested for this meeting. So make sure that what is in your responsibility and in your control is done to the best of your ability, and just kind of get really serious with it and reflect the solemnity of the meeting. This is serious. um but equally, like you say, do be present. So sometimes, for example, I would offer, like, does anybody want a cup of tea or coffee
yeah,
or something, if there were facilities. This was, so I'm thinking of this HR meeting that I did where they'd hired a meeting space close to their offices, but not in their offices, which I do think is a good idea because it was a neutral space, literally. Um, but the facilities were right outside, and I'd already used them myself to make a cup of tea. So it was just something like that. So that in my mind as well, because my client is the employers,
yeah,
I know they are really tense as well, because often, say with HR matters, especially if you are a small or medium-sized business where you don't necessarily, you're not big enough to perhaps even have in-house full-time HR, let alone in-house staff that could take the minutes for those type meetings. So you're having to outsource either with your HR consultant and then with people like us doing the minutes. So part of my job, I think, is to kind of try and ease some of that tension. So
yeah,
I will just, okay, I've made sure there, just things like I made sure there were water glasses out and a full
yeah,
jug of water, because that's the last thing you want is to, your mouth perhaps going dry anyway because you're feeling tense, but not having water there. So things like that. So I try and see it as my job to be detached from the emotion as much as possible. But I am human. It's not always easy depending on what's being discussed. But I'm a professional and that I've got to do that. That's my responsibility.
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, who doesn't love a cup of tea? It is that kind of,
It's
it is
medicinal.
it's just breaking the ice, isn't it? Because obviously,
Yeah,
a lot of the time we can't break the ice the other ways. We have got to remain neutral, but you
yeah.
know, bonding around a cup of tea is just the best, isn't
It
it?
does
So
help. It does help. And then one thing I was just thinking then was, so like you say, it's tense sort of live when you're in those meetings, whether you're on Zoom or any kind of video meeting or whether you're in person. But one of the things that can be tricky with these type meetings, or when a what you thought was going to be a normal meeting goes, you have a bit of a shocker and people do get quite heated, is then when we are producing that first draft of the minutes, how what techniques can we use to make sure that the minutes are professional from start to finish when they're read.
yeah,
For example, if somebody does say something quite heated, it's that question, isn't it, of how do you minute that?
yeah. It is so difficult, and it's just the terminology really that we can use as minute takers. So
Yeah,
if someone has got an objection, maybe it would be, for example, like my initials, like SC interjected, or SC,
raised a concern
yeah,
around.
or
Yeah,
challenged, or,
yeah, yeah.
just saying it in,
Emphasized, highlighted,
yeah,
like, did you say just say challenged? Yeah,
challenged, yeah.
challenged. Yeah, there's a whole vocabulary, isn't there, of different verbs like that we
Mm.
can use to diplomatically describe an exchange without um, putting it in verbatim, literally what was said. But that I find that does take me a bit longer because you're not being able to just easily recall and write down what happened. You are having to filter it.
Yeah, absolutely. And how am I going to filter this and word it? And
Yeah.
naturally, if the client's happy for the meeting to be recorded, which is always very helpful,
Yeah.
um, then you relive the meeting.
I
I feel like
know.
for me, the emotion comes back. I'm like, oh
Yeah.
yes, like you remember all of those tense moments in the meeting, and it
Yeah.
is like a reliving the meeting. And I think what I do really to decompress from that, and as you will be obviously very aware, is sending voice notes to each other. So
Yes.
as a minute taker or as an exec, like just sending a voice note and just having that decompression after a meeting to be like,
Yeah, that was a tough
okay,
one.
yeah,
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as colleagues, um, we can always, because it's within our own ecosystem, our own Microsoft ecosystem, so the data is all protected. There can be times where I might send you my minutes to say, can you just read that section and just check, like, have I captured that professionally? Does that sound um, like they made a challenge, but they didn't argue. Because that's what
yeah,
you don't want is to make it like a script where it's he said, she said, and they're arguing. You don't want that to come across in the minutes. But I do think one of the things as well when you're actually in the meeting is if people are talking over each other, because sometimes when emotions run high, people don't wait for each other to stop speaking, which if you're in a hybrid meeting, so you're virtual,
mhm,
but most of the attendees are in person in the room together, that I think is probably the most difficult because they can kind of forget you're there.
yeah,
Um, and especially if you've gone off camera,
yeah,
but you're desperately trying to keep track of who's saying what,
mhm,
and what are they saying. Um, whereas I suppose maybe the easiest is when you're all virtual because there are visual cues when one person's talking. So Zoom or some of them, the different ones, the box will be highlighted when that person's talking. Their name will be there under the box, at the bottom of the box. There's different things like that to help us keep track.
yeah,
Um, but
absolutely.
yeah, have you had that kind of thing?
Yeah, no, no, I was just going to say, the funny thing is, like, when we get a recording only, so it's a
Yes.
meeting that's already taken place,
Yeah.
naturally we will try and collate as much as we can, like the board pack, agenda, any kind of like indication of how the meeting went. But then you just never know when you get on the recording and it's, like the tension starts maybe, or
Yeah.
sometimes like it is like that paddling moment where it's like, oh, I feel like I'm treading on water and just trying to kind of get used to who's who and all the rest of it. And I think actually that can make it more difficult because you've not almost got like an association of, oh, I was in the meeting and I knew, this was Lydia sat here. And
That's it. Yeah.
as
Yeah.
much as we get seating plans, like I think in your mind, it's sometimes good to make an association and link the
Yeah.
parts together, really.
Yeah.
But obviously that's just our job, and.
No, absolutely. And something to say as well is that with these meetings, certainly the way we do it,
Mhm.
we will have had liaisons and meetings, introductory meetings if it's a new client with the clients beforehand.
Yeah,
And if the client already knows or is anticipating that there will be either the whole meeting will be contentious or tense, or they anticipate a particular agenda item might be tense, or contentious, that they brief you on that beforehand. And actually, but I will always make sure to have that discussion with them about, look, I'm only going to be minuting in a professional way the discussion, and of course any actions and decisions that, or any voting, for example, that comes out of that segment. um but often I will also, just as we as colleagues debrief, I'll also do that with the client.
Yeah.
So maybe not that day, it does depend on their diaries, but perhaps as part of sending over that first draft, I do try and get on the phone or a video meeting and just have that debrief with the client to check in about saying, look, item 5, as you said,
Mhm.
was contentious. I've done my best. As you know, so and so did, it was tricky, wasn't it, with the way they chose to present their point of view. Um, Read that bit and let me know any feedback or amendments about how I've demonstrated that discussion. And I do work with them. There is a fine line, of course, isn't there? That when I say I work with them for that section, it's not to doctor or change what was said in terms of the spirit of what was said, and as much as possible the words.
Yeah.
Um, but that, I would say, tense meetings where there is a challenging section, they are probably the ones where you have to use your discernment and work with the client to make sure it's still true to the meeting, but you cannot sometimes use the words that were used,
No.
which is different to most of the time, when
Yeah.
you're minuting meetings.
Yeah, it is. And I think like in those types of meetings, sometimes it is just getting to the end of the conversation because there can be a lot of repetition
Oh,
because
that's true.
naturally, with the tension, maybe they feel like the point isn't getting across in the way
Yeah,
that they want to. So
yeah,
things will be naturally repeated sometimes over and
yeah,
over. And
yeah.
again, it does really help me when I get the recording because then it's like you just sit down. I mean, I put my very ugly headphones on. I've got like a full top piece headphones, but I really just sit there and listen, and get to that end of the conversation because then you can see the pattern of the repetition and what we can
What
obviously,
they said across each time they repeated it, you can sort of
yeah,
pull them all together and then summarize that.
yeah,
Yeah, actually, now you say that, that's what I do. Yeah, because like you say, yes, they've repeated it, but they might have said something slightly different the second time they did it. And also
yeah,
in the minutes, you wouldn't say they said this 3 times, or
no,
you don't say any of that. You just plot out the conversation as if it happened once.
yeah,
This point, this project was discussed or presented, and then you would say this challenge was made. Uh, this then, if somebody then came back to that to rebut the challenge, you might then say, so and so explained, expanded,
yeah,
whatever their response is, and then if there were any different challenges, then you might put that one, and then again the rebuttal and that kind of thing. And I find that deconstructing of the discussion and reconstructing it professionally often does the job.
yeah. No, it really does.
So I think for us, it's thinking when you've got a difficult meeting, it's thinking prepare mentally before joining, whether that's in person or online, get there that little bit early to compose yourself. Stick to facts, not feelings, isn't it? As much as possible.
Yeah,
Don't like detach personally. This is not personal to us as the minute taker. I know it might feel it to the people in the room. And debrief afterwards with colleagues,
mhm,
but also with clients
yeah,
to make sure it's captured well and in terms of your minutes.
yeah. No, absolutely. I think what and I'm sure you do as well, like when I go in person, again, it's like kind of being like an actress. Like I kind of put on my formal clothes and maybe like a bit of lipstick, and I don't know, it helps me almost like get into character that
Oh,
way.
I get that. It's your armor.
Yeah,
It's
basically.
it's your
Um,
armor. Yeah.
And I will, like, what I find really difficult is when the meeting has ended and you're in
Okay.
person and you're walking out of the meeting, and naturally that's the time when people want to congregate, talk about and debrief themselves what has happened. And maybe some members of the meeting will kind of walk ahead, but then there's others that kind of maybe hang around, and sometimes they want to kind of debrief with you, and it's staying in that neutral kind of
Yeah.
zone still. um
Absolutely. Yeah. I tend to busy myself with packing
yeah,
up,
yeah.
and then just say, well, thank you so much. And then I tend to try and liaise with my point of contact and just sort of be very practical and like, just to confirm, then I'll get the first draft to you by this deadline. And let me know if you have any amendments that, just keep it really practical and professional, and then kind of go, thanks very much, bye, and
Yeah, and
and run
literally
away.
like dash to the car, sort of.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just like you say, to keep neutral. But this is definitely one of those parts of the job that no one tells you about, but once you've done a few, I think you realize it's all about calm professionalism.
Yeah, it really is. And yeah, just not taking it personally. Like, I think that is the number one, really. Because we're just there as an independent, but it can be difficult, can't it, to detach sometimes. We are only human, but
Yeah,
it is our job. So yeah.
bring it on.